All right, now I'm going to introduce you to one of my favorite controls in Xamarin Forms. It's called Table View. So Table View is very popular for building forms and setting pages. So the input controls you have learned about so far, we don't just put them anywhere on the page. Most of the time, we put them in the table view. Now let's see what is a table view like. A table view consists of one or more sections. So here we have a table view with two sections. The first one is called Basics. The second one is Date Time. Now in each section, we can have one or more cells. The first cell you see here is Text Cell, which we have seen before in the section about List View. We also have Entry Cell, which allows us to capture some text from the user, like this. And here's an example of a switch cell. So we have a label and a switch. And finally, start and end are examples of custom cells. So we don't have a built-in cell that allows us to capture a date. So I've created two custom cells that include a date picker. We could put a slider here, or pretty much anything. In this lecture, you're going to learn about the basics of table view and how to use the built-in cells. And then in the next lecture, I will show you how to create custom cells. And here's the same page rendered in Android. So we have the same structure, but using a different style. Now let's see how we can implement a table view. So in our main page, first I want to remove the padding, because I want our table view to fill the entire page. So we start with table view element. Now each table view has a root. So we have a root property here that we can initialize using property element syntax. And this property is of type table root. Now unfortunately the IntelliSense is not very helpful here. And by the way, this root property is the content property for the table view, which means we can remove this element and simply put table root inside table view. How did I know that the root property is the content property? In Google, we search for Xamarin Forms table view class. Now look at the first link here. Here's the declaration of the table view class. You can see it's decorated with content property attribute. And the name of this content property is root. Now if you scroll down, you can see root is of type table root. So whenever you're working with these elements, I would recommend you to have a look at the documentation to have better understanding of various properties and events of these elements. Now back here. In table root, we can have one or more sections. So I'm going to add a table section element. And we can optionally give this a title. Title basics. Now inside each section, we add one or more cells. So let's try some of the built-in cells. One is text cell, which we have seen before. So here we set text to name and detail to Mosh Hamadani. We also have entry cell, which includes an entry control. So here we can set the label to title, and we can also optionally set a placeholder. So this is the text that appears when the entry is empty. Shopping. We also have keyboard attribute, just like the one you saw in the lecture about entries. And if you want to do something, when the user completes the entry, you can handle the completed event. But again, in most real-world scenarios, we don't handle this event here. Most of the time, we have a button for the user to submit the form. So let's remove this here. Another built-in cell is switch cell. Switch cell. And here you can set the text that appears before the switch, like notifications, and on to toggle the switch. Now I wish this attribute was called isToggled to be consistent with the API of switch element. And finally, if you want to do something when the state of the switch changes, you can handle onChanged event. So pretty straightforward, doesn't really need more explanation. Now, one last thing I want to show you here. This table view has an attribute called intent, which is an enumeration. So here we have data, and this is useful for building pages that display various attributes about some object. Now we could use a list view, but with list view, every cell in our list is exactly the same. Whereas with table view, we have more control over the appearance of each cell. So our cells can vary in terms of their appearance. We can also use a table view as a form, and this is useful if you want to capture some data from the user. Another intent is settings, which is kind of similar to form, but the difference between settings and forms is that settings always have a default value, and mostly they include switches. And finally, we have another intent called menu. So we can use a table view for building a page that looks like this. Now, most of the time, setting the intent does not make a difference in the appearance of your table view, but Xamarin recommends to set it as a best practice. So on this page, I'm going to set this to form. Now let's run the application. And here's our table view. So you see an example of a text cell, an entry cell, and a switch cell. Next, I'm going to show you how to create custom cells.